For 25 years, Terry Ruse lived in that house. He ate breakfast in that house. He watched television in that house. He slept in that house every single night for a quarter of a century. And the entire time, according to prosecutors, Kimberly Langwell was buried 6 feet beneath his bedroom floor, wrapped in a blanket, sealed under concrete, invisible to everyone who had spent 2 decades looking for her. He knew exactly where she was. He had put her there, and then, according to court testimony, he did something that stopped investigators cold when they finally learned about it. He paid for a billboard. A large roadside billboard placed in Beaumont, Texas, carrying Kimberly's photograph, asking the public for information about her disappearance. A man who, according to the evidence, had shot her in the back of the head and buried her under his own bedroom floor, put up a public billboard asking if anyone had seen her. The judge who sentenced him called it insane. She called it psychotic. She told that courtroom directly, and these words are from the official sentencing record, that she believed he met the dictionary definition of a psychopath. And here's the detail that makes this case unlike almost anything in the cold case files of Beaumont, Texas. There was a man who knew all of this in 1999, a man who had been told within days of Kimberly's disappearance exactly what had happened to her and exactly where she was. He kept that secret for 25 years. He kept it while Kimberly's daughter, Tiffany, grew up without a mother. He kept it while investigators hit dead end after dead end. He kept it while Terry Ruse put up that billboard. And then, in 2024, facing a grand jury with no way out, David Wiley finally told the truth. What he said led investigators to one bedroom in one house on Lindbergh Drive. And what they found under that floor ended 25 years of silence in 13 hours of excavation. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what happened to Kimberly Langwell on July 9th, 1999, the evening she called her 15-year-old daughter to say she would be home for dinner and never arrived. You will follow the original investigation that hit a wall it could not break through for over 2 decades. You will find out what David Wiley knew in 1999 and why he stayed silent for a quarter century. You will hear the exact words Terry Ruse used to describe what he did to Kimberly, taken directly from court testimony. You will follow the excavation hour by hour and find out what investigators pulled from beneath that bedroom floor after 13 hours of digging through concrete and tile. And you will hear what Terry Ruse said about Kimberly's daughter in a recorded jail call, words that a judge described as the words of a psychopath before she sentenced him to 40 years in prison. This is the complete story of Kimberly Langwell, and the man who hid her where he thought nobody would ever find her. He was wrong. Kimberly Ann Langwell was born on February 24, 1965 in Houston, Texas. She grew up surrounded by family, her parents, her sisters Susan Butts and Tony Lynn Cross, and her brother. By the time she reached her 30s, she had built a life in Beaumont, Texas, working hard and raising her daughter Tiffany on her own. She worked multiple jobs simultaneously to make that work. 3 jobs at one point, according to people who knew her. Not because she had to, because she wanted to give Tiffany everything she could. People who knew Kimberly described her as warm and direct. Someone who showed up when she said she would. Someone who called when she said she would call. She was 34 years old in the summer of 1999. Tiffany was 15. They had dinner plans that evening, July 9th, 1999. Nothing elaborate, just the 2 of them, the kind of ordinary weeknight routine that families build their lives around. Kimberly left work at the chemical plant in Beaumont just after 5 p.m. She called Tiffany as she was leaving. She said she would be home soon. She said she had one stop to make first. She was going to swing by the house of her ex-boyfriend, Terry Ruse. It was not supposed to take long. She had known Terry for some time. The relationship had ended, but according to people close to her, they had maintained contact. The visit that evening was routine. She drove to his house on Lindbergh Drive, and that was the last confirmed movement anyone outside that house can account for. She never came home for dinner. She never called again. July 10th, 1999. Kimberly's daughter Tiffany had waited all evening. She had tried calling. No answer. She had stayed awake. Still nothing. The next morning, Tiffany and her aunt Susan Butts drove to the Westmont Shopping Center on Dowlin Road near Phelan Boulevard in Beaumont. Kimberly's car was sitting in the parking lot in front of what had been an Eckerd pharmacy, locked. When investigators looked through the window, they found her briefcase on the seat. Her mobile phone was inside the car, but her purse was missing. Her keys were missing. Detective Joe Ball, who responded to the scene, would later say in a CBS News interview that this detail bothered him immediately. A woman whose car sits locked in a parking lot with her work bag and phone inside, but whose purse and keys are gone, that combination suggested she had left with someone, willingly or otherwise. There were no signs of a struggle at the car. No blood, no broken glass. Nothing that indicated violence at that location. Ball began interviewing everyone connected to Kimberly. He spoke to her current boyfriend. He cleared him. He spoke to a former supervisor named Frank McCormick, who investigators learned had developed an obsessive infatuation with Kimberly, sending her love letters, creating disturbing photo collages of her, and making her increasingly uncomfortable at work. McCormick had a grocery store receipt that placed him elsewhere at the time of her disappearance. He was ruled out. Then Ball drove to Lindbergh Drive. He knocked on Terry Rose's door. Rose told him Kimberly had stopped by that evening, stayed briefly, and left. He said he had no idea where she had gone after that. He said he had not seen or heard from her since. Ball walked through the house. No signs of Kimberly. No signs of violence. Nothing that gave him a legal basis to push further. But something was wrong with Terry Rose's answers. Ball later described them as vague, evasive, the kind of responses from someone who was choosing words very carefully. He asked Rose to take a polygraph test. Rose agreed. He failed it. Ball knew he was looking at the right person. He was certain of it, but certainty is not evidence. And without evidence, the case could not move. Kimberly Langwell was entered into the missing persons database. Her photograph went on flyers. She was featured on the television program Cold Justice, which highlighted unresolved cases, and Terry Rose went home to Lindbergh Drive, where Kimberly was already buried beneath his bedroom floor, and where she would remain for the next 25 years. The case went cold. It was periodically revisited. New detectives, new eyes on old files, new attempts to find something that had been missed. Nothing moved. Tiffany grew up. She built a life. She never stopped asking questions about her mother, but at some point, she told CBS News, she reached a place of complete denial because denial was the only way to keep functioning. Meanwhile, according to court testimony, Terry Rose continued to live on Lindbergh Drive. He decorated the house. He had people over. He had a common-law wife named Violet who lived with him. And at some point, according to the sentencing testimony, he paid for a billboard to be erected somewhere in the Beaumont area, carrying Kimberly's photograph and asking the public if anyone knew what had happened to her. The judge at his sentencing would later say that act, knowing what she knew by then, was the most insane thing she had encountered in that case. She used the word psychotic to describe it directly from the bench. The years passed. 1 became 5. 5 became 10. 10 became 20. Then, in the spring of 2023, Beaumont police reopened the investigation. New detectives, new resources, a formal commitment to go back through every piece of the original case. They pulled the old witness statements. They looked again at everyone who had been interviewed in 1999, and they focused on one name. David Wayne Wiley. David Wiley had been Terry Rose's friend and his employee, a tow truck driver who worked for Rose's business. In 1999, when investigators questioned him, Wiley had told them he had no information about Kimberly's disappearance. He said he didn't think Terry had anything to do with it. He said Terry wasn't that type of person. Investigators had suspected he was not being fully truthful, but they could not prove it, and the case moved no further. When detectives reopened the investigation in 2023 and returned to Wiley, they were watching him carefully. In April 2024, the Jefferson County District Attorney convened a grand jury. Both Terry Rose and David Wiley were required to testify under oath. Rose delivered the same story he had maintained for 25 years. Wiley testified as well and said nothing new. But investigators watching him described what they saw as unmistakable. He was nervous. He was deeply uncomfortable. His body language was telling them something that his words were not. After the grand jury, Detective Heather Wilson made a decision. She called Wiley and asked if he would be willing to take a polygraph test. His immediate response, according to Wilson's account to CBS News, was, "You're going to need to contact my attorney." That was enough. In April 2024, David Wiley met with investigators at his attorney's office. He had one condition: full immunity from prosecution. Investigators had to consider whether Wiley might have been an accomplice. But when they explored that possibility, the answer that came back through the attorney was clear. Wiley said he did not participate in the killing. He had information about what happened. That was all. They accepted the immunity deal. And David Wiley told them what he had known since July 1999. He told them that on the evening of July 9th, 1999, at around 6:15 p.m., he received a call from Terry Rose. Rose asked him to come to the Westmont Shopping Center. When Wiley arrived, Rose was sitting in a car that Wiley recognized immediately. It was Kimberly Langwell's car. Rose got out of Kimberly's car, got into Wiley's tow truck, and they drove somewhere together and played pool. Rose said nothing about Kimberly that evening. He acted, according to Wiley's court testimony, completely normally. But sometime that weekend, Friday or the following day, Rose told him. According to Wiley's direct testimony at the sentencing hearing, Ruse said he had shot Kimberly in the back of the head. He said he had dug a hole in the slab of the bedroom at his home on Lindbergh Drive. He said he had put her there. He specified which room, the front bedroom, closest to the street. Wiley told the court his reaction. He was shocked. He was astonished. He was scared for his own life. He said nothing to police in 1999 because he was afraid that his prior knowledge would make him appear complicit. He carried that secret for 25 years. He said in court that he was tired of it being on his conscience, that he could not live with it any longer. Wiley's account was verified by Polygraph, and investigators now had what they needed. The plan to search Rose's home required precision. Investigators were concerned about two things. First, if Ruse learned that Wiley had talked, Wiley's life could be in danger. Second, they were worried about the safety of Rose's common-law wife, Violet, who lived with him on Lindbergh Drive. They could not simply show up at Rose's front door with a search warrant. So they built a ruse. Terry Rose's father had been murdered approximately 5 years after Kimberly's disappearance. That case remained unresolved. On June 10, 2024, investigators called Terry Ruse and Violet to the Beaumont police station, telling them they needed to discuss his father's homicide case. Ruse arrived at the station. He sat down with detectives. They discussed the father's case briefly, and then Detective Jesus Tamayo walked in. Ruse looked up at him and said he looked familiar. Tamayo told him directly he had been one of the detectives who worked the Kimberly Langwell case. According to Detective Heather Wilson, Ruse's expression shifted. He had come in for one conversation and found himself in another. As Tamayo served him with the search warrant for the Lindbergh Drive property, a separate team of investigators was already at that house. The search had begun. Texas EquiSearch, the volunteer search organization, brought in ground-penetrating radar equipment. The team moved through the house methodically. In the front bedroom, the one closest to the street, exactly as Wiley had described, the radar identified an anomaly. The concrete slab in that area was missing a piece of rebar. Something had been disturbed at some point and repaired. The repair was visible to investigators who knew what they were looking for. On June 13, 2024, 3 days after the search began, investigators broke through the tile floor. Beneath the tile, they found a void. Inside the void, Detective Tamayo located a keychain and a pair of broken sunglasses. Then, moments later, an identification technician found something else. 3 small bones, very small. Investigators identified them as what they believed to be toe bones. According to Detective Wilson's account to CBS News, the moment those bones appeared, they knew. They obtained an arrest warrant for Terry Ruse immediately. As the warrant was being signed, undercover officers were already watching Ruse, tracking every movement he made. The excavation continued for 13 hours. At the conclusion of that excavation, investigators had recovered Kimberly Langwell's complete skeletal remains, wrapped in a blanket, from beneath the bedroom floor of the house where Terry Ruse had lived for 25 years. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains were hers. The analysis also confirmed a gunshot wound to the back of the head, exactly where David Wiley had said. Terry Ruse was arrested on June 13, 2024, 25 years and 4 days after Kimberly Langwell drove to his house and never came home. Ruse was charged with murder. His bond was set at $1 million. He was held in custody. In August 2025, he was offered a plea deal capping his sentence at 40 years. He rejected it. Jury selection was scheduled to begin December 8, 2025. On December 2, 2025, 6 days before the jury was set to be selected, Ruse changed his mind. He pleaded guilty to murder. Under the terms of the plea, his sentence was capped at 40 years. He surrendered his right to appeal. The sentencing hearing was held on December 16, 2025. Before Judge Raquel West handed down the sentence, a recorded jail call was played in that courtroom. In it, Terry Ruse described July 9, 1999, the day he shot Kimberly Langwell, as a bad day. He said he had dealt with it wrong. He said he had messed up and had to live with it. He did not express grief for what he had taken from Kimberly's family. He also made remarks about Tiffany, Kimberly's daughter who had spent 25 years without her mother. According to court reporting from the Cinemaholic, Ruse said in that call that he hoped Tiffany would die in her 40s or 50s. He blamed Kimberly for what happened, suggesting that if she had simply been honest with him, none of it would have been necessary. He sat in that courtroom and said nothing when the judge asked if he had anything to say to Kimberly's family. Judge Raquel West looked at him directly. She referenced his statement that he was not a psychopath. She told him, "Who isn't a psychopath that kills someone that they once cared about and buries them in their house and lives on top of them for 25 years?" I would think that's the definition in Webster's dictionary of a psychopath. She said if she could have given him 50 years, she would have given him 50. If she could have given him 60, she would have given 60. She sentenced him to 40 years, the maximum under the plea agreement. The courtroom erupted in applause. Ruse must serve at least half of his sentence before he is eligible for parole. Given that he is 68 years old, prosecutor Luke Nichols told reporters that this sentence amounted, in practical terms, to a life sentence. Kimberly Langwell was 34 years old when she drove to Lindbergh Drive on a July evening in 1999 to make one stop before coming home for dinner with her daughter. She had worked 3 jobs to give Tiffany the life she deserved. She had survived a relationship that hadn't worked out and kept going. She had plans that evening. Simple ones. Dinner with a 15-year-old girl who was waiting for her to come through the door. Tiffany McInnes waited 25 years for someone to tell her the truth about where her mother was. That truth was buried 6 feet beneath a bedroom floor, on a street in Beaumont, in a house where a man lived his ordinary life for a quarter of a century. He put up a billboard. He asked the public if anyone had seen her, and he knew where she was the entire time. The detective who first worked this case, Joe Ball, told CBS News that it had haunted him after he retired, that he felt he had failed Kimberly and failed her family. He did not fail them. He was right about Terry Ruse from the very first interview. He just needed 25 years for one person's conscience to finally break. David Wiley was tired of living with it, and Tiffany McInnes finally got her answer.